It was an ordinary morning at Oakwood High School, the kind of day that passed quietly with little more than the usual hustle and bustle. The students shuffled between classes, the bell rang like clockwork, and teachers went about their routines, preparing lessons. But today, something unusual was in the air. The school principal, Mr. Harris, known for his sharp suits and strict policies, had announced in assembly that no one had seen coming. The students gathered in the large auditorium, whispers filling the air as they wondered what it could be about. Some speculated it was a routine meeting, while others guessed it was another one of Mr. Harris's disciplinary talks. No one was prepared for the curveball he was about to throw. As the principal stepped onto the stage, his confident, authoritative presence silenced the room instantly. The audience looked on, some curious, some nervous. He cleared his throat, adjusted his glasses, and began his speech with his usual stern tone. "Students of Oakwood High," he began, "today I bring you a challenge, something a little different. We all know that some of you are more musically inclined than others. Some of you can sing, others can play instruments, and some even have talents you haven't discovered yet." He paused, scanning the crowd of students who were hanging on to his every word. The suspense in the air was palpable. What could this be about? Mr. Harris continued, a slight smile playing on his lips. "But there's one thing I've noticed. Many of you tend to hide behind excuses. You think you're not good enough, or that you're incapable of doing something great. Today, we're going to test that theory. We're going to challenge one of you to break free from those excuses." His eyes scanned the room. And then, with a dramatic pause, he pointed directly at a student sitting near the front. "Jamal, step up here," he commanded, his finger pointing toward a young black boy who had been sitting quietly in the middle of the crowd. The entire auditorium went silent. Jamal was known around school as a quiet, reserved kid, someone who never sought the spotlight. He was a bit of an outsider, often found sitting alone in the cafeteria, keeping to himself. He wasn't particularly athletic, and although he was a good student, he never really stood out in the way other students did. Jamal hesitated. His heart raced as all eyes shifted to him. He could feel the pressure of the moment, his palms starting to sweat as he stood up. Why had Mr. Harris called on him? He wasn't one to volunteer for anything, let alone take the center stage in front of the entire school. Jamal slowly walked up to the stage, his mind racing with uncertainty. The principal didn't give him much time to think. "You're going to play the piano, Jamal," Mr. Harris said, gesturing toward the grand piano placed at the side of the stage. "We'll see if you can impress us with your musical abilities. Don't worry, we'll all be here to support you." Jamal stood there for a moment, frozen. He had never played the piano in front of anyone, let alone an audience of hundreds. He was good at playing music on his own, but the idea of performing in front of a crowd was terrifying. His heart beat faster as he glanced at the piano. It was an elegant grand piano, but to him, it might as well have been a mountain he had to climb. The principal's words echoed in his ears. "Playing the piano won't fix being pathetic." The harshness of that statement cut through him, and his stomach twisted in knots. Was this a joke? Was he being set up for failure? The other students watched, some looking amused, others waiting to see how he would respond. Jamal swallowed hard, his nerves making it difficult to breathe. He looked at the piano again. His hands felt cold and clammy as they balled into fists. The thought of playing poorly in front of the whole school made him want to shrink away and disappear. But something in the back of his mind told him to stay strong. He didn't want to be seen as someone who couldn't rise to a challenge. He wasn't going to back down. He stepped forward and sat down at the piano bench, his fingers hovering over the keys, unsure of where to begin. His mind raced as he tried to think of a song, something that could prove he wasn't the joke everyone might think he was. He was determined not to fail, but the pressure was overwhelming. The principal's challenge echoed in his mind, and the eyes of the entire school were fixed on him. The silence in the room was deafening as everyone awaited Jamal's next move. This was his moment. The tension was thick, and the weight of expectation was heavy. Would he crumble under pressure, or would he rise to the occasion? The audience was on the edge of their seats, eager to see what would happen next. Jamal's hand shook as he finally placed his fingers on the keys. The challenge had begun, and with that, the first note was played. It was just the beginning, but Jamal had no idea that this moment would be the one that would change everything for him. The silence in the auditorium was almost suffocating. Jamal's fingers trembled as they hovered over the piano keys. His mind was racing, trying to recall the few pieces of music he had taught himself to play in the privacy of his room. He had always loved the piano, ever since he was a little boy. But playing in front of an audience, especially one that had been told by the principal to expect something spectacular, was a completely different challenge. Jamal felt as though the eyes of the entire school were weighing on him, their judgment hanging in the air like an invisible cloud. The principal's words echoed in his mind. Playing the piano won't fix being pathetic. Jamal's hands instinctively clenched into fists, his nails digging into his palms. The pressure felt unbearable, but something deep inside him urged him to keep going. He wasn't going to let this moment define him as weak or incapable. No matter how scared he was, he had to try. Taking a deep breath, Jamal pressed his fingers to the keys. He wasn't sure what song he was about to play, but he just knew he had to play something that would prove to the principal and to himself that he was more than what people thought of him. The first note rang out, low and uncertain, but it was enough to break the silence. Jamal paused, feeling his heartbeat echo in his chest. The audience was still watching, waiting, and he could hear the soft whispers of doubt from a few students in the back. The principal, standing at the edge of the stage with his arms crossed, watched intently, his expression unreadable. The others, however, were growing restless, uncertain of what would come next. Some were even smirking, already assuming that Jamal wouldn't be able to impress them. But Jamal didn't care. He took another breath and began to play, the melody growing bolder as his fingers glided across the keys. With each note, the nerves that had consumed him began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of calm. For the first time, he wasn't just playing to fulfill a challenge. He was playing because it was something he loved, something he had always done when no one was watching. The sound of the piano filled the auditorium, smooth and flowing, as Jamal lost himself in the music. The piece he played wasn't complex, but it was beautiful, a simple, soothing melody that seemed to resonate with the room in a way Jamal hadn't expected. The tension that had gripped him was slowly replaced with a sense of peace. He didn't have to prove anything. He simply had to be himself. As Jamal's fingers danced over the keys, the mood in the room began to shift. The whispers died down, and more students began to listen. Some looked at one another, exchanging surprised glances. The principal, standing at the side, appeared to soften. His arms, once tightly crossed, now hung loosely by his sides, his expression slowly shifting from skepticism to something else, something like admiration. In the crowd, a few students leaned forward, unable to tear their eyes away from Jamal. It was as though they were hearing the music for the first time, something in the way the sound resonated with them that felt different, something real, something raw. The boy who had been silently underestimated by many was now holding the attention of the entire school, his music speaking louder than words ever could. Jamal kept playing, each note more confident than the last. His heart, which had once pounded with nerves, now beat in sync with the rhythm of the piano. The music flowed through him, each chord carrying with it the weight of his struggles, his hopes, and his quiet determination. He wasn't just playing a song. He was telling a story, one that he had never shared with anyone before. As he continued, the tension in the room melted away, replaced by a growing sense of awe. Some of the students began to exchange looks, as if they were seeing Jamal for the first time. The whispers had stopped, and in their place, there was a silence that spoke volumes. For a few moments, Jamal wasn't the shy, reserved boy everyone thought they knew. He was an artist, a performer, someone who had something incredible to share. The music reached its crescendo, building an emotion, and for a brief moment, Jamal's eyes met the principal's. In that fleeting instant, Jamal could see it, the surprise, the disbelief, and something else, a growing respect. The principal's expression softened, his earlier stern demeanor fading away as the music spoke for itself. By the time Jamal reached the final notes, the auditorium was completely silent. He finished with a gentle, almost hesitant flourish, his fingers lingering over the keys before pulling away. The sound of the last note faded, and there was a moment of stillness before the room exploded into applause. Jamal's heart raced as he stood up from the piano, unsure of how to react. The applause felt overwhelming, as though the entire school had just acknowledged him in a way he had never experienced before. His cheeks flushed with a mix of surprise and relief. The nervousness that had gripped him moments before was now replaced with something far more powerful: pride. He had done it. He had stood up to the challenge. As Jamal looked around, he saw the students, the teachers, and even the principal, all clapping, their faces filled with admiration. He had done the impossible. He had taken a joke, a challenge that was meant to humiliate him, and turned it into something truly extraordinary. The room buzzed with energy as the applause continued, but in the midst of it all, Jamal could only hear the steady beat of his own heart, a reminder that he had just proved to everyone, including himself, that he was capable of greatness. The applause slowly faded, but Jamal remained standing by the piano, still processing what had just happened. He hadn't expected this. In his wildest dreams, he had never imagined that his simple, impromptu performance would be met with such admiration. His heart was still pounding from the experience, but there was a quiet satisfaction within him, a deep sense of accomplishment that spread throughout his body. For the first time, Jamal felt seen, not as the quiet, overlooked student, but as someone who had just proven his worth. The room, once filled with tension and judgment, now felt different. Students whispered excitedly to one another, their voices filled with disbelief. "Did you hear that?" one of them said, still trying to wrap their head around what they had just witnessed. "I didn't know Jamal could play like that." In the back of the room, a group of students who had been skeptical moments ago were now nodding in quiet approval. The principal, who had once been so quick to point out Jamal's supposed inadequacies, was now looking at him with something new in his eyes: respect. Jamal's mind was still racing. He had expected to feel embarrassed, to feel like a failure after being called up by the principal. He had expected to falter, to make a fool of himself in front of everyone. Instead, he had done the unthinkable. He had amazed them all. And the realization hit him like a ton of bricks. He wasn't just the quiet, invisible boy at Oakwood High anymore. He was something more. He was capable. But the surprise wasn't over. As Jamal turned to step away from the piano, his eyes flicked toward the principal, who had moved closer to the stage. The principal's usual stern expression had softened, and there was something different in his eyes, something Jamal couldn't quite place. Mr. Harris had been watching him closely throughout the performance, but now there was a shift. The principal's arms, which had been crossed tightly in front of him, were now relaxed at his sides. "I have to say," Mr. Harris began, his voice calm and measured, "I was wrong about you, Jamal." Jamal froze. The words hit him like a wave. He had expected a passing remark, maybe even a congratulations, but nothing prepared him for this. Mr. Harris, who had always been a man of rigid rules, strict discipline, and sometimes harsh judgment, was admitting that he had been wrong. The room went quiet again, and Jamal's stomach twisted nervously. He had always seen the principal as a figure of authority, someone who never made mistakes. The idea that Mr. Harris would admit to being wrong about him was something Jamal could hardly believe. "I thought this was going to be a joke," Mr. Harris continued, his voice steady but laced with a hint of surprise. "I thought you'd be just another student who couldn't rise to the occasion. But what I saw today, The principal's voice faltered slightly before he regained his composure. "What I saw today was something remarkable." Jamal blinked, unable to process what was happening. Had he really just heard the principal admit that he had been wrong about him? In front of the entire school, it was almost too surreal to believe. The students around him were equally stunned, and a few exchanged glances, probably wondering if they had just heard the same thing. Mr. Harris stepped forward, his eyes now focused solely on Jamal. "You've got something special, Jamal. You've shown all of us that there's more to you than meets the eye. And I want you to know that this moment," he gestured to the piano, and then to the students gathered around, "has changed the way I see you. It's changed the way I see all of you." Jamal's breath caught in his chest. The weight of Mr. Harris's words sank deep within him, and for the first time in years, Jamal felt a rush of warmth in his chest. It was the kind of feeling he had longed for, but never dared to expect. This wasn't just about proving something to the principal. It wasn't about earning approval from his peers. This was about proving something to himself. Jamal had always been his own harshest critic, constantly doubting his abilities and wondering if he would ever be able to break free from the shadows of self-doubt. Now, in front of everyone, he had done it. Jamal looked around the room at the faces staring back at him. There were students who had once overlooked him, people who had never taken the time to know him, now staring at him with wide eyes, filled with respect. The whispers, once dismissive, were now filled with admiration. "You didn't just play the piano," Mr. Harris continued, his tone more sincere than Jamal had ever heard it. "You showed everyone what it means to rise above. You turned an ordinary moment into something unforgettable. And that's what makes you exceptional." For a brief moment, the room was filled with an almost electric energy. Students were clapping, nodding, and some were even standing up in their seats, showing their appreciation. Jamal could hardly believe it. This was more than just applause for a piano performance. This was respect. This was recognition. The principal finally stepped back and nodded toward Jamal. "I'm proud of you," he said, his voice genuine. "You've earned it." Jamal stood there, stunned and speechless, as the applause continued around him. He couldn't find the words to respond. He didn't need to. In that moment, Jamal knew he had just stepped into a new chapter of his life. No longer the boy everyone overlooked. He was now someone who had proven his worth, not through words, but through the power of his music, his passion, and his willingness to take a challenge head-on. As the last of the applause faded, Jamal finally managed to smile. He had done it. He had risen above expectations, and in doing so, had earned something far more valuable than approval. He had earned his place. The applause gradually died down, but Jamal stood at the center of the stage, unsure of how to process everything that had just happened. The weight of the moment lingered in the air, and yet it felt as though time had slowed down around him. The sounds of clapping and excited whispers echoed in his ears, but his thoughts were miles away. He had done it. He had proven himself in a way he never imagined. As he looked around, Jamal's eyes locked onto the faces of his peers, his teachers, and most notably, the principal. Mr. Harris, the man who had once thought of him as nothing more than an invisible student, was now looking at him with respect. Genuine, heartfelt respect. That alone was enough to make Jamal's chest swell with pride. "Thank you," Jamal finally managed to say, his voice shaky, but filled with emotion. It was all he could muster as he turned toward the piano, the instrument that had carried him through this monumental moment. The applause had stopped, but the room was still buzzing with excitement. It was clear that no one had expected this outcome. Not the students, not the teachers, and certainly not the principal. Jamal had proven them all wrong. But there was something else, something even more surprising, that was about to unfold. Mr. Harris took a few steps forward, his gaze still fixed on Jamal. But this time, there was no judgment, no harsh expectations. "Jamal," he said, his voice steady but filled with a newfound admiration, "I'm not the only one who's impressed. Your performance today has inspired more than just a few of us." Jamal blinked, taken aback by the principal's words. What did he mean? Inspired? How could his simple piano performance have done that? Before Jamal could fully process what was happening, Mr. Harris gestured toward the back of the auditorium. "We have a guest in the audience today," he said, his tone becoming more serious. "Someone who might be able to offer you something far beyond the recognition of your classmates." Jamal turned toward the direction Mr. Harris was pointing, his heart racing with confusion. In the back of the room stood an elderly man, dressed in a distinguished suit, with silver hair and glasses perched neatly on his nose. He had been sitting quietly during the performance, his face unreadable as he listened. "Mr. Thompson," Mr. Harris said, addressing the man in the back, "please come forward." The elderly man nodded and slowly made his way to the front of the stage. As he approached, Jamal couldn't help but notice the air of importance around him. Who was this man? And why had the principal singled him out? When Mr. Thompson reached the front, he smiled warmly at Jamal, extending his hand. "Jamal," he said, his voice calm and kind. "I have to admit, I've seen many performances over the years, but what you just did, that was something truly special." Jamal shook his hand, still in shock. "Thank you," he whispered, unsure of what else to say. Mr. Thompson continued, his eyes twinkling behind his glasses. "I'm the director of a prestigious music academy downtown, and we're always on the lookout for gifted young musicians. After hearing your performance today, I'd like to offer you a full scholarship to our academy. You have a rare talent, Jamal, and I believe it deserves to be nurtured." Jamal felt as though the floor had been swept out from under him. A scholarship to a music academy. This was beyond anything he could have imagined. He had come to school that day expecting to be humiliated, to prove himself in a silly game. Instead, he was standing in front of one of the most powerful figures in the local music world, being offered an opportunity of a lifetime. "Wait, what?" Jamal stammered, his mind struggling to catch up. "Are you serious? A scholarship?" Mr. Thompson nodded, his smile widening. "Absolutely. You've shown more than just technical skill. You've shown heart, passion, and resilience, traits that we value deeply at our academy." Jamal stood there, speechless, his mind racing. This wasn't just a lucky break. This wasn't just about proving the principal wrong. This was a chance to follow his dreams, to step into a world he had never dared to believe was possible for someone like him. I don't know what to say," Jamal finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The overwhelming emotions that had been building up inside him were starting to break free. This was the moment he had always dreamed of, but never thought he'd get, and it had come in the most unexpected way. "Say yes," Mr. Thompson said with a chuckle, still holding out his hand. Without another thought, Jamal took his hand. "Yes," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of disbelief and joy. "Yes, I'll do it." The room erupted into applause once again, but this time, it was different. This wasn't just applause for a performance. This was applause for a life-changing moment. Jamal had just been given an incredible opportunity, an opportunity that would take him beyond the confines of Oakwood High and into the world of professional music. As Jamal stood there, still processing everything, he realized that this moment, this unbelievable outcome, wasn't just about proving something to the principal or his classmates. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of achieving anything he set his mind to, and for the first time in his life, Jamal truly believed it. As the applause continued, Jamal looked out at the sea of faces, his heart full of gratitude. He had done it. He had taken an impossible situation and turned it into something extraordinary. And now he was on his way to something even bigger, a future filled with possibilities, all because he had dared to step up when it mattered most. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but for Jamal, it was a journey he was ready to take.